When my daddy passed away in 2005, I was so angry. The entire first year, just angry. You couldn't talk to me, you couldn't say anything to me. And I developed a condition called costochondritis, which is usually brought on by intense stress like that. Um, if y'all want, I can talk more about that another time. But in order to help myself heal, I began to write a book. I started a group. Back then it was Yahoo, and all about people who had lost their fathers. And they told me the stories of how they lost their dads. And through sharing each other's pain, we healed each other. And it was a great help. So, this new series that I'm going to be doing um, is going to be talking about when hospice fails. Now, before I begin this, I want to say that I'm not speaking about all hospice. I know there are some beautiful stories from hospice family, people who have been on, their families have put their loved ones on hospice. And there are some nurses that have told me some really beautiful stories. And then there is Hospice Nurse Julie on YouTube that I joined her channel or subscribed to her because my mom was going through this ordeal. And I found a lot of comfort in watching her, thinking that's how it was going to be for my mom. And nothing could be further from the truth. Go back and read what my mother went through. So I decided to look to see just how many other stories out there are like ours. It's scary, there's actually way too many. As her husband lay moaning in pain from the cancer riddling his body, Patricia Martin searched frantically through his medical bag looking for a syringe. She had already called the hospice twice, demanding liquid methadone to ease the agony of Dr. Robert E. Martin, 66, a family practice physician known to everyone as Dr. Bob. He had served the small remote community in Wasilla, Alaska for more than 30 years. But the doctor in charge at Matsu Regional Home Health and Hospice wasn't responding. Staff said he was on vacation. Then they said he was asleep. Martin waited 4 days to get pain pills delivered, but her husband could no longer swallow them. Now they said she should just crush the drugs herself, mix them with water, and squirt the mixture into his mouth. That's why she needed the syringe. My sister was told to basically do the same thing with my mom. My mom died with the medicine still on her lips, the Dilaudid. She couldn't, at that point, swallow. I thought if I had hospice, I would get the support I needed. They basically said they would provide 24/7 support. We were told the same. She said, still shaking her head in disbelief, 3 years later. It was a nightmare. Patricia had enrolled her husband in hospice when the metastatic prostate cancer reached his brain, expecting the same kind of compassion, timely attention he had given his own patients. But Bob Martin had the misfortune to require care during a long holiday weekend, when hospices are often too short-staffed to fulfill written commitments to family. I'm sorry, but if you are in a line of work where dying people, and their families literally could call you at any moment, you need to have someone available. The consequences, as documented through a review of official records and interviews, were dire. It took 6 days and 3 more phone calls before he received the liquid methadone he needed. My mom never even got that. Hospice denied Patricia Martin's request for a catheter, and she and her son had to cut away his urine-soaked clothing and bedding, trying not to cause him additional pain. This breaks my heart. This breaks my heart. The supervising hospice doctor never responded. A nurse who was supposed to visit didn't show up for hours, saying she was called for jury duty. Oh my God. I am sure she could have gotten out of jury duty for this. Bob Martin died just after midnight on January 4, 2014. It was just sheer chaos, Patricia Martin said. It makes me wonder about other people in this situation. What happens to them? And it's the same thing me and my sisters have been saying. Something's got to be done. Does this happen? This actually, from the stuff I've been reading, happens more often than you would think. And we want for it to not to happen to another family. The Martins had entrusted the ailing doctor's final days to one of the nation's 4,000 plus hospice agencies, which pledged to be on call around the clock to tend a dying person's physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. It's a thriving business that served about 1.4 million Medicare patients in the U.S. in 2015, including over a third of Americans who died that year, according to industry and government figures. Yet, as the industry has grown, the hospice care people expect and sign up for sometimes disappears when they need it most. Families across the country, from Appalachia to Alaska, have called for help in times of crisis and been met with delays, no-shows, and unanswered calls. The investigation analyzed 20,000 government inspection records, revealing that missed visits and neglect are common for patients dying at home. I'm going to read that again. The investigation analyzed 20,000 government inspection records, revealing that missed visits and neglect are common for patients dying at home. People have an image of hospice in their mind, and I am beginning to believe that the peacefully dying at home is more rare than it is common. Families or caregivers had filed over 3,200 complaints with state officials in the past 5 years. These complaints led government inspectors to find problems in 759 hospices, with more than half cited for missing visits or other services they had promised to provide at the end of life. The reports, which do not include victims' names, describe a 31-year-old California woman whose boyfriend tried for 10 hours to reach hospice as she this sounds just like my mom. He tried for 10 hours to reach hospice as she gurgled and turned blue, and a panicked caregiver in New York calling repeatedly for middle of the night assistance from confused hospice workers unaware of who was on duty. Same thing happened to my mom. In Michigan, a dementia patient moaned and thrashed at home in a broken hospital bed, enduring long waits for pain relief in the last 11 days of life, and prompting the patient's caregiver to call nurses and ask, "What am I going to do? No one is coming to help me. I was promised help at the end." Only in rare cases were hospices punished for providing poor care, the investigation showed. 6 weeks after Martin died, his wife filed a complaint against Matsu Regional with the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services. The agency's investigation concluded that the hospice failed to properly coordinate services, jeopardizing his end-of-life care. Hospice officials declined to review requests for the story. Hospice is available through Medicare to critically ill patients expected to die within 6 months who agree to forego curative treatment. Now that part I don't like that part. Yes, even if you are expected to die within 6 months, why forego treatment that could cure you? I don't understand that. Treatment that could actually cure you, and I got some issues with that myself. The care is focused on comfort instead of aggressive medical interventions that can lead to unpleasant, drawn-out hospital deaths. The mission of hospice is to offer peaceful, holistic care and to leave patients and their loved ones in control at the end of life. Agencies receive nearly $16 billion a year in federal Medicare dollars to send nurses, social workers, and aides to care for patients wherever they live. While the vast majority of hospice is covered by Medicare, some is paid for by private insurance, Medicaid, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. To get paid a daily fee by Medicare, hospice agencies face many requirements. They must lay out a plan of care for each patient, ensuring they'll treat all symptoms of the person's terminal illness, and they're required to be on call 24/7 to keep patients comfortable. But because each patient is different, there's no mandate spelling out how often staff must show up at home, except for a bi-monthly supervisory visit. Hospices must stipulate in each patient's care plan what services will be provided, when, and by whom, and update that plan every 15 days. Hospices are licensed by state health agencies and subject to oversight by federal Medicare officials and private accreditation groups. Although many people think of hospice as a site where people go to die, nearly half of hospice patients receive care at home, according to industry figures. At its best, hospice provides a well-coordinated, interdisciplinary team that eases patients' pain and worry, tending to the whole family's concerns. For the 86% of Americans who say they want to die at home, hospice makes that increasingly possible. But when it fails, federal records and interviews show at least patients and families are horrified to find themselves facing death alone, abandoned, even as agencies continue to collect taxpayer money for their care. In St. Stephen, Min Leo D. Furstenberg, 63, a retired U.S. Veterans Affairs counselor, died panicked and gasping for air on February 27, 2016, with no pain medication, according to his wife. They said a shipment sent from Heartland Home Health Care and Hospice included an oxygen tank, a box of eye drops, and nose drops, but no painkillers. My mom didn't receive the painkillers, and she died like that too, gasping for air. And this makes me even sadder because there are other people going through this. You put your trust in hospice. You put your loved ones' literal life and death in their hands, trusting that they know what they're doing, that they're going to be there. The whole idea of hospice is so that your loved one goes quietly, peacefully. Instead of having a peaceful memory of my mom passing and a much easier grieving process, we're going to be haunted for the rest of our life with the torture that she went through in her last hours. A torture that she was well aware that was happening to her. For more than 2 hours, she tried desperately to comfort her husband, who had an aggressive form of amyloidosis, a rare disease that can lead to organ failure. But he died in her arms in bed, trapping her under the weight of his body until she managed to call neighbors for help. That last part of it was really horrible, she said. The one thing I promised him is that he wouldn't be in pain and that he wouldn't suffer. The hospice nurse and us promised my mom the same thing. She even said something in the hospital, being worried that it would be a violent death. She was worried about that. And those promises weren't kept. Later, state investigators determined that Heartland's on-duty hospice nurse had muted her phone, missing 16 calls for help. Hospice officials did not respond to repeated interview requests. They never followed their protocol, and I've never had anybody from there say, "We failed, we were wrong." According to my sister, at least the hospice is admitting that they failed, that there were a whole string of things that went wrong. That doesn't make it better, that doesn't make it okay, and that doesn't make it go away. She said she relives her husband's death daily. If that had been me on my job, I'd be fired. Her account was among more than 1,000 citizen complaints that led state investigators across the country to uncover wrongdoing from January 2012 to February 2017. But the complaints offer only a glimpse of a larger problem. These are people who got upset enough to complain. Officials with the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, an industry trade group, said that such accounts are inexcusable but rare. I would venture to say, whatever measure you want to use, there are an exponential number of positive stories about hospice that would overwhelm the negative. But when you are one of the negative, that's your story. That's our story. And whenever we recall my mom's passing, it won't be with peace. It'll be with that anxiety and that regret and that feeling, honestly, like we had somehow let her down with her being on hospice. And though it wasn't our fault at all, the nurse, I actually found the site for the hospice that was supposed to be taking care of my mom. And I sent an email to the organization itself, not just the local hospice group, letting them know what happened and that I believe that the so-called nurse in charge needs to lose her job. But that's not even going to make it okay, because this is something we got to live with for the rest of our lives. When I remember my daddy passing away, even my stepdad had cancer. He was never in pain. He never needed pain med. And his cancer was throughout his entire body, even his brain. The only time he was in pain was the last night of his life. And he had a tremendous headache because he had a brain bleed. And he went in his sleep. My daddy, just here one second, literal, gone the next. Just like that. No pain, nada, didn't even know what hit him. Neither did my stepdad. Didn't know, just gone. But my mom will never be able to recount her being gone or even think about her memory without that traumatic moment playing in our heads. But even one case is too many, and hospices should be held accountable for such lapses. It's like medical malpractice. It's relatively rare, but when it happens, it tarnishes the entire field. How often hospices fail to respond to families or patients is an understudied question, experts say, in part because it's hard to monitor. But a recent national survey of families of hospice patients suggests the problem is widespread. 1 in 5 respondents said their hospice agency did not always show up when they needed help. This has got to change. I will put the link to this article in the description box below. And it breaks my heart. And I want so much to be a part of the solution so that other families don't have to go through it. Because this is something that we're never, I don't think, ever going to get over. Even when we start to heal just from losing our mom, there's always going to be that black spot of how she went. That's going to be with us forever. And it gives me fear of my own death. It really does. Now I'm questioning how am I going to go like that? And that alone just gives me extra anxiety. You know, when my day comes and I'm close to death, I'm going to be nothing but anxious, worried, sick that I'm going to go like that. And that just shouldn't be a thing. I've always been kind of afraid of death my entire life, and I had just literally gotten over that fear. Maybe in the last year or so. Um, and now it's back tenfold because of this, because of what happened with my mom. Hospice has to be held more accountable. I'm pretty sure Can't speak for my sisters, but I'm pretty sure I'm not done with them. They need to be held accountable. I'm not going to just wave my hand and say, whatever.